Ukraine and Russia have exchanged new conditions for ending the war, with Russia easing its territorial demands on Ukraine as part of a possible peace deal. Hakan Fidan, head of Turkey's foreign ministry, made this statement the previous day. According to him, the Kremlin initially insisted on taking control of the entire territory of the four regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, including areas not controlled by the Russian army. Now, Vladimir Putin has allegedly agreed to freeze the front along the line of contact in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, but he demands to be given Donbass. As you know, we've already heard all of this before, but today, after Fidan's statement, both Moscow and Kyiv have voiced their own conditions. Today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation stated that they demand Ukraine's neutral status, protection of the Russian language, and the church. They also added that security guarantees for Ukraine aren't even worth discussing, saying that it's something the Kremlin should determine on its own. At the same time, Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that Russia is stalling the negotiations because the Kremlin has already received something from the Americans and now they're in no hurry. But he also commented on the issue of creating a buffer zone and a ceasefire. And he added, "What will security guarantees for Ukraine look like?" My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is August 29 the South. Let's discuss this topic in depth together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechi News. The link is in this video's description. So, over the past day, as you know, the question of the conditions for ending Russia's war against Ukraine has come up again. And now the head of the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hakan Fidan, stated that Russia has supposedly softened its territorial demands on Ukraine as part of a possible peace arrangement. According to him, initially the Kremlin insisted on taking control of the entire territory of the four regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, including those areas that the occupiers do not control at all. Now, according to Fidan, Vladimir Putin has agreed to freeze the front line along the line of contact in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Here is the quote: "An agreement to transfer to Moscow 25 to 30% of the unoccupied territory in the Donetsk region and to stop hostilities along the line of contact in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson." Well, here's a question for our delegation. What kind of preliminary agreement is this about transferring the unoccupied part of the Donetsk region to Moscow? Why am I asking this question? Because a little later we'll discuss Zelensky's statement, who said today that in fact there are essentially three negotiation tracks going on. Ukrainian delegations are negotiating with the Americans, Europeans, and representatives of the so-called Global South. These are countries from the Middle East and Turkey. Interesting. What preliminary agreements exist? Fidan added that this could be a major foundation for the terms of a possible peace agreement. According to Fidan, the day before he discussed potential agreements with Witkoff, the special envoy of the United States President, and then with a great friend of Turkey, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov. I don't know if these questions about a preliminary agreement to hand over Donbass to the Russians arose from the dialogue with Umerov or not, but the question remains open. Then Fidan states that Russia currently controls 88% of Donbass and 73% of the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions in total, about 20% of Ukraine's territory. Despite ambitious plans, the Russian army advances slowly. Last year, it took 1% of Ukrainian territory, and in the 2025 summer offensive, 3.1%. At the same time, according to the Turkish side, as part of a possible deal, Moscow is allegedly also ready to return to Kyiv the areas of Kharkiv, Sumy, and Dnipropetrovsk regions that are under Russian control. Well, today the direct and official positions of both sides have already emerged. Today, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova stated that security guarantees for Ukraine should not be a condition for negotiations, but rather their result. Other than that, she didn't say anything new compared to what Lavrov said, stating that the agreement should supposedly include demilitarization, denazification, and a neutral, non-aligned, and non-nuclear status for Ukraine, ensuring the rights of the Russian language and Russian-speaking population, and ending the persecution of canonical orthodoxy, says the Russian Foreign Ministry's press spokesperson Mashka Zakharova. In general, it's all the same brazen demands without the slightest change. Later, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov said Putin still doesn't rule out meeting with Zelenskyy. But according to him, it is possible on the condition that a meeting at the highest level must be well prepared. But for now, he says, it's hard to say that work at the expert level is in full swing. At the same time, today, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, also made many statements. First of all, Zelenskyy commented on rumors that as part of a ceasefire, the creation of a buffer zone along the front line is being proposed. Let me remind you that Politico reports European leaders may create a buffer zone between Ukrainian and Russian forces in a peace deal. Zelenskyy responded to this as follows, quote, "I've heard this more than once from Europeans and Americans. Only those who don't understand the technological state of today's war are suggesting a buffer zone of 40, 50 or 60. I've even heard a proposal for 100 kilometers. That's a completely different story. Today our heavy weapons are already more than 10 kilometers apart because everything is targeted by drones. This is a buffer zone. I call it a dead zone. Some call it a gray zone. It already exists." Well, then Zelenskyy said that if someone wants a buffer zone, then the armed forces of Ukraine will stay in their positions. But as for the Russian soldiers, those Russian soldiers can be moved deeper into the temporarily occupied territories, and that's how you get this buffer zone. You want 100 kilometers, move 100 kilometers away from our land, and there you have your buffer zone. As for the meeting with Putin, Zelenskyy said that the Russians will do everything to avoid a meeting between the leaders, but some signals indicate that negotiations might still take place. Zelenskyy claims the Americans have already given the Russians something and are delaying. Quote, "The Russians will do everything to avoid meeting. In my opinion, they got something because they had a meeting with the United States. If the meeting had been proposed right away as a trilateral one, there would have been more chances for a trilateral meeting. Before that, there was a bilateral track between America and Russia. Well, it is what it is, we didn't decide that. At the same time, if the pieces come together and both the Global South and the United States play their roles, Russia should be ready for negotiations." And here Zelenskyy reveals new details. Ukraine's negotiation teams are working simultaneously with countries of the Global South and the United States on prisoner exchanges, the return of children and citizens of other states, and are also preparing platforms for future meetings of leaders. Quote, "As for the negotiation process, right now our team is working through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Switzerland, and the United States. Besides America, the Global South is also involved with a bilateral track there. All these countries with our delegation assisted with prisoner exchanges and returning children, also with the return of some prisoners who were captured by the Russians and who are citizens of other countries. The next day there will be a European track. And this still remains a mystery for now, how exactly Middle Eastern countries will be involved in any negotiation track in the future. Zelenskyy announced 3 main blocks of security guarantees for Ukraine. The first involves keeping the current size of Ukraine's armed forces and supplying them with weapons, thanks to Ukrainian, European, and American production. The second block concerns NATO. It is about agreements with partners at the leaders' level regarding their readiness to support Ukraine in the event of new aggression. And the third block is sanctions against Russia and the use of frozen Russian assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine. But the key point, as Zelenskyy added, is that Ukraine demands legally binding guarantees. Quote, "We want security guarantees from key European countries and the United States backed by their parliaments and Congress. Yes, we want legally binding security guarantees. We don't want a second Budapest memorandum. We don't want the Minsk agreements. We want a serious document." Well, and finally, Zelenskyy added that Ukraine is expecting strong actions from the United States of America towards Russia. Since the Kremlin did not agree to Washington's proposal for a meeting between the Ukrainian, Russian, and American leaders. And further, he stated that Trump's deadline for Putin ends on Monday, and we will remind the United States president about this. Quote, "Each of us must be responsible for what we say and what we are prepared to do. We are waiting for strong United States action against Russia, because they offered us KAM and we agreed, but Russia has not agreed yet. On Monday, the 2 to 3 weeks set by United States President Donald Trump for Russia will expire as the deadline to decide whether to agree to a bilateral or trilateral meeting. The 2 weeks end on Monday, and we will remind everyone about this." I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all. Take care. Goodbye.